Okay, today we're going to be learning Beitzah Daf Gimel. We have a lot of dedications for today. Masechet Beitzah is dedicated by new friends of Hadran in appreciation of all who find new ways to be marbitzei Torah berabim berabot. This month of learning is dedicated by Rabbi Lisa Malik in honor of her daughter, Rivka Weiner, who recently made Aliyah, and in memory of Rivka's namesake, Lisa's grandmother, Regina Post, Zechrona Lebracha, a Holocaust survivor from, I don't even know how to pronounce this word, something, Poland, who lived in Brooklyn, New York, and was an active member of the Israel of Flappers during the post-Shoah stage of her life. Baba Gina's Yurtzeit was on the 24th of Elul. It is very fitting that Rivka's first day out of Bidud after her flight from the States and her first day of work was on her great-grandmother's 22nd Yurtzeit, which also coincided with the Daf Yomi Siyum of Masechet Sukkah. And today's Daf is sponsored by Donna Meltzer in honor of her grandfather, of Eli Meltzer. My grandfather was a devoted, lifelong Talmud scholar and teacher. And lastly, by Deborah Dixon in honor of Ruby Levant's bar mitzvah this Shabbat, wishing a huge mazal tov to Audrey and Jerry who are listening to the Daf and to the entire Levant family. Okay, with those long dedications, we will get started with our Daf. So just to do a quick review, I know Beitzah is a little confusing in the beginning. I still leave it up to you to say, is this, I've seen it mentioned a bunch of times, her Rebbe must have really just had a lot of fun with this case, and that's why he started the Mishnah with this Beitzah Shenolda case. So I leave it to you to decide whether you find it too confusing or kind of fun. But what's good about Daf Yomi is we always, always moving from topic to topic. So we have this case, and again, I'll try to organize so that it doesn't seem overwhelming. We have this case in the Mishnah of a Beitzah Shenolda b'Yom Tov. It was laid on Yom Tov. I say born because that's the translation of Nolda, but really you would say it was laid on Yom Tov. Beit Shammai says you can eat it. Beit Hillel says you can't. The question is why? What is the case? We discussed how the Bavli distinguishes between eggs that were generally sold for the purposes of eating. Chickens that were sold for the purposes of eating them versus chickens that were sold for the purposes of laying eggs or hens. So we basically are trying to figure out what is the case of our Mishnah. The first, and really why Beit Hillel forbids this. So the first answer we have is Rav Nachman, and he says it's talking about a tarnagolet that was meant legadel beitzim, which basically is muktzah, because you don't plan to use it. You don't plan to slaughter it on Yantiv. Normally you can slaughter, but since this wasn't one of the hens that you were intending to slaughter, you set it aside, meaning you weren't planning to use it to slaughter. Therefore, it's muktzah. And also what comes out of it is nolad. It wasn't even in existence before. So for sure, it's going to be forbidden, right? According to Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai will say, oh, we don't hold by muktzah, we don't hold by nolad, right? Which matches the approach of Rabbi Shimon versus the approach of Rabbi Yehuda, who has a more wider definition of what comes into the category of muktzah. We ended with a question on Rav Nachman, which was, if really the whole issue is a muktzah issue, then it should have also mentioned the tarnagolet, should have mentioned the hen as well as the egg, because it's all one category. Then we brought answer number 2, which was Rabbah. Rabbah says the issue is hachana. Everything has to be prepared before Yantif. And he said, really, this egg was prepared because 24 hours before it's really prepared and ready and formed. However, I'll just tell you that I recommend reading Talmudology, this website I mentioned previously, which is, they have a whole article that talks about actually the formation of the egg. They say it takes about 25 hours, but it's not actually fully formed 24 hours before. There's a difference in terms of the scientific approach anyway, but we're going to go with what the Gemara assumes to be, because that's what we work with. So Rabbah basically says, right, this is already it was already prepared from yesterday, which means that really Beitzah Shenolda Yom Tov is really okay. However, what's the real case where it's a problem? A Beitzah Shenolda Yom Tov that came after Shabbat. If Yom Tov was on Sunday, or if Shabbat came after Yantif, and the Beitzah was nolda on Shabbat, whatever it is, the second day, it would be a problem because it wasn't prepared from 2 days before, right? Which it would have to be. So now, according to him, it's d'oraita the issue, because he holds hachana comes from the Pesukim about the man. The verse is about the man. The Gemara then says, well, if the real issue is Yantif coming after Shabbat, then why doesn't it say so in the Mishnah? Why does it give a case of Yantif? To which we said, well, we make a gzera there just to make sure. But the real issue is a d'oraita issue. I want you to remember this because this is going to be important later for when we're going to question some of the approaches we have the first approach is a muksa nolad issue, which isn't really to oraita either. Isn't to oraita, but it seems to be possibly treated as almost maybe having importance like a doraita muksa. Some people actually do say there is some source that holds muksa comes from the Torah. It also is connected with things being prepared before, etc. I'm not going to get into all the details, but we'll come back to that later. The next two answers are gzerot de Rabbanan. That means rabbinic ordinances. The next two answers are the Mishnah is talking about a concern that if we permit this, you might permit something else. So we started with Rav Yosef at the bottom of Bet Amud Bet. Rav Yosef said, Gzera mishum perot hanoshrim. We're worried that trees, we all know that trees that, or maybe you don't, but now you know, trees that fall from a tree, fruit that falls from a tree on Shabbat is forbidden to use. We'll see in a minute why. Because it's forbidden, we're also going to forbid an egg that's laid because it's very similar. Right there, it's attached to the tree. Here, it's attached, so to speak, to the hen. Therefore, when it comes out, if we permit it, people will think that we can also take fruits that fall off a tree. Okay, so therefore, that's the problem. That's why Beit Hillel says it's forbidden. To which Abaye says, Amalei Abaye, perot hanashlim tamamai. But wait a minute, Abaye is Rav Yosef's student, and he often asks him lots of questions. He says, wait a minute, what's the whole reason why you can't have perot, fruits that fell to the floor on Shabbat or Yantif? Shemaya alevi yitzlosh. We're worried that if we allow you to eat a fruit that fell off your tree on Shabbat, you might, or on Yantif, you might think that you can go and pick a fruit from that tree. Now, picking a fruit is usher by Torah law. It's forbidden. That's called kotzer, right? It's like harvesting. Because of that, we forbid it. Okay, so now let's go along. There's a doraita, there's a Torah prohibition to pick fruits. The rabbi said, just in case you come to pick fruits, we're going to forbid you even take fruits that fell off the ground. Then, since we forbade that, we're going to forbid you also to eat an egg that was laid on Shabbat or Yantif. That doesn't make any sense because that's a classic case of a gzera on a gzera, an ordinance that was to prevent another ordinance. Normally, a gzera is to say, lest you come to do a deoraita, a Torah obligation, a Torah prohibition. So that's what the Gemara says. Higu for gzera, it itself is a gzera as an ordinance. We're not going to do a gzera on a gzera. There's no such thing. We don't do that kind of thing. So what does the Gemara answer? Interesting answer, maybe convincing, maybe not. Kula chad gzerahi. When they decided to say perot hanoshrim, fruits that fall from a tree are forbidden, they basically included anything that's like fruits that fall from a tree. So it's one whole ordinance. They said, because of this issue that we're worried you're going to climb up your tree and pick your fruits from your tree, we're also going to forbid Beitzah shenolda. Because of a Beitzah shenolda, you might think, since you can have an egg that was laid, you might think you could go pick your fruits from your tree. So it's all part of the same zera. Again, it might be a bit of a stretch to say that, but that's their answer. We're going to have a very similar structure to the fourth answer because it's the same type thing, and we're going to ask the same question again. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, and here we get to our fourth and final answer for how to explain the Mishnah. Gzera mishum mashkim shezavu. There's a gzera, okay, we're going to forbid it because if we allow this, you might think that liquids that seep out of fruits are permitted, and they're not. Liquids that seep out of fruits are forbidden. What's the issue? We're going to see right now. So Amarle Abaye, again, Abaye questions and says, what are you talking about? Mashkim shezavu tamamai. What's the reason that liquids that seep out of fruits are going to be forbidden to drink? Okay, let's say I want to drink them. Why? Gzera shema yischot. We're worried that if you have, let's say, a lemon sitting there and juice, right? It often happens. You have a lemon sitting in a bowl and juice seeps out of it. So you can't drink that lemon juice. Why not? Because we're worried that if we allow you to drink that lemon juice, you might think that you could squeeze the lemon. Okay, I'm not going to get into all the halachas of squeezing lemons and all that. The main issue, just so you know, and we're going to see this distinction in a minute, that there's a difference between fruits that are, or at least according to some, there might be a difference between fruits that are intended for their liquids, like grapes and olives are the most famous because grapes are always used for wine and olives are mainly used for olive oil, right? Even though people do eat olives and people do eat grapes, the main thing is the liquid that comes out of them, as opposed to maybe lemons and oranges and things like that, which, you know, it's debatable. well, lemons maybe are more in the category, they're more used for juice than for eating. But oranges, for example, I don't know what the statistics are, but I assume that it's possible that more are eaten than actually juiced. Or you might, let's say, okay, we're in Rosh Hashanah, pomegranates, right? Much fewer people drink pomegranate juice than actually eat pomegranates. So anyway, these are some issues that come up in that issue. I'm not going to get into all the details, but in a minute, we're going to see what the issue is. What's the problem with schita, squeezing? Now, this is all gzera so that you don't come to squeeze. Squeezing out the liquid from a solid, right, from a solid object is a problem of mifarek, it's called, which is a toladav dash, threshing. What's threshing? Where we take the kernel of the wheat out of its shell, which is basically taking something out from where it's inside, protected inside, and we're removing it from the inside. This is very similar. You could see why the egg is similar to this. The egg is maybe ready, but it's inside something and you're taking it out. It's very similar to the kernel in the wheat and the chaff. And it's also similar to liquids that are inside a fruit, right? And then you take them out. So those all have a similar effect. And there are ways that squeezing is allowed if you do it onto food, not onto liquids. There's also debates about them. Anyway, I'm not going to get into halacha lemasa. But what do they say here? Abaye says, mashkim shezavu. So now we go one step farther. Squeezing is a problem. However, we're going to say that if the liquid seeped out on its own, it's also a problem. Why? Because then you might come to squeeze it. So now they say, higufa gzera v'ananikam nigzor gzera l'gzera. Abaye asks the same question. Mashkim shezavu is only a gzera, rabbinic ordinance. So now we're going to make a gzera on that and add the egg. So what do they answer? Again, the same answer, kul echad gzerahi. Okay, it's all part of the same, meaning when they said liquids that seep out, they also said eggs that get laid. It's all the same thing, and it's all part of, if we allow that, you'll think that you're allowed to actually squeeze fruits and that you're not allowed to do, so therefore they forbade it. Now we're going to do an analysis. Now that we finished all four, what was the issue with each one, right? Whenever you have multiple answers, it means that each one is somewhat problematic. So what's the issue with each one that necessitated other responses? Which, in other words, you could say, or the way the Gemara is going to ask, why didn't so-and-so say like so-and-so? Okay, why didn't Rav Nachman say what Rabba said? Why didn't Rabba say what Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yitzchak said, or etc.? So the first one we're going to say is Kulu Rav Nachman lo amre. It's very easy to say why they didn't all agree with Rav Nachman, and they started coming up with alternative explanations because the Gemara already told us that. Ki kushyan, because there was a difficulty with it. Remember, we said if it's a muktzah issue, it should have mentioned the tarnagolet as well, and since it didn't, it must not be. It was a muktzah issue. Ki Rabba nami lo amre. Very simply, we could say hachana leit lehu. Not everybody agrees by this law of hachana. Not everybody thinks that it's a thing. We're going to see this later, the machloket Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, not today, but we're going to see in tomorrow's stuff. It's a machloket about Rav believes in hachana, that there's din of hachana, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't. So you can see that this is an issue, subject of debate among different rabbis. So therefore, you could say the others maybe didn't hold by this law. Ela Rav Yosef, my time alo amar Rabbi Yitzchak. But the more difficult question is, why choose perot hanoshrim over, right, fruits that fall from a tree over mashkim shezavu, liquids that come out of a fruit, or the reverse? So why did Rav Yosef not say mashkim shezavu? Amar lecha, right? If you're going to have a choice, okay, you can already start thinking about it. Would you rather compare the egg to a fruit that was attached to a tree, right, that fell onto the ground from the tree? Or does it make more sense to compare it to liquids that seeped out of a fruit? So they say, Amar lecha Beitzah uchla uperot uchla. Let's compare things that are similar. Egg is a food and fruits are foods. La fuke mashkin de lav uchla. Right? Drinks are drinks, right? Liquids are liquids. We're going to compare solid to solid and not to liquids. So therefore, we're going to compare the egg to the fruits that fell off the tree. But Rabbi Yitzchak, my time alo amar Rav Yosef, what's his reason? Why does he think we are going to compare it to liquids? Why is it a better comparison to liquids that seeped out? Amar lecha. Beitzah blu'ah umashkim blu'in. They're both very similar in that they're inside something else. They're kind of swallowed up, right? They're inside something else, right? The literal word is blu'ah, it's swallowed up, but it really means it's inside, as opposed to lafuke perot and miglu v'kaimu. The fruits are exposed. They're just attached, but they're exposed. So therefore, it's a different kind of thing. So it makes more sense that mashkim shezavu, you're going to also make a gzeira on eggs that are inside. It all seems much more similar. So even though one's a solid, one's a liquid, it's still a more similar kind of case. So again, there's logic to be said for each. Okay. Our next section is going to be a little bit long, but the main point, again, I want to just show you the flow. The main idea here is we want to prove that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yitzchak, that he also compared Beitzah shenolda to mashkim shezavu. The way we're going to see this, to liquids that seep out, the way we're going to see this is that Rabbi Yochanan put two Mishnayot up against each other and said, these Mishnayot contradict. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in these Mishnahs contradict each other. And one is going to be talking about liquids that seep out, and the other is going to be talking about a Beitzah shenolda. And because of that, the fact that he compares the two must mean that he thinks they're one and the same, okay, that they come from the same place. And that's basically why we're bringing this. But in the process of doing this, what we have to understand is first, what are the two Mishnayot that contradict each other? What's the contradiction? How does Rabbi Yochanan resolve it? And then, because already we brought this up, this contradiction, we're going to bring two other resolutions to the contradiction, which really have nothing to do with it's not really relevant to the sugya, but it's mentioned here because the whole point was, I want you to remember what the idea was from the beginning, to show that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yitzchak, the mashkim shezavu is the Beitzah shenolda, that an egg that's laid is just like mashkim shezavu, liquids that seep out. So here's our Mishnah. So first, let's read inside. He thinks that an egg is forbidden. Beitzah shenolda, an egg that's laid on yantif, is forbidden because it's just like liquids that seep out. How do we know Rabbi Yochanan says this? Rabbi Yehuda, he put against two Mishnayot, which both mention Rabbi Yehuda, and said they contradict, umeshane. And then he taught his explanation. Tanan, and as his explanation isn't really as important other than the comparison is what's important. Tanan, it says in the Mishnah, Ein sochatin et haperot lotzi mehem mashkin. You can't squeeze fruits to get the liquid out. Ve'im yatzu me'atzman asurim. If they came out on their own, they're forbidden. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda omer, im la'ochalin. If it's, now here they make that distinction I made before. If it's fruits, let's say an apple, it's generally meant to be eaten and juice seeps out of the apple. Im la'ochalin hayotze mehem mutal. Then if liquid seeps out, then it's going to be a problem. In the mashkim hayotze mehem asur. If it's for liquids, and that's if it's like olives and liquid seeps out, whatever comes out of them is forbidden. Yes, this is an issue of Shabbat, but it's also an issue on Yom Tov. Okay? Okay, so here you have this distinction that he makes between food, where food, he says this is not a problem. Why does he think it's not a problem? Alma, from here you can infer, kol ochalin l'Rabbi Yehuda uchle de ifratu. Any food, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is considered, if you have an apple, what's inside the apple, inside the peel, is food. It's just considered part of the food. Okay. And therefore, when it comes out, it doesn't, even if the liquid that's inside of it is just considered part of the food. And therefore, it's not really a problem here. Okay. Now, what do you see? That we don't consider, we're not worried about mashkim shezavu in this case. Uriminu. Now, this contradicts Odamar Rabbi Yehuda. This is, here starts another Mishnah. And further, Rabbi Yehuda says, it's further to something else. Matne Adam al kilkalash perot b'yom tov rishon va'ochla b'sheni. Okay, this case is a little less relevant. I'll explain it in a minute, but I want to get to the key line, which is v'chein beitzah shenolda b'rishon te'achel b'sheni. Here you see we're going to compare it to a beitzah shenolda, where he says, if there were 2 days of yantif, then if it was born on one, you can eat it on the other. Okay, now, here we're talking about, you have 2 days of yantif, whether it's Rosh Hashanah or whether it's Chag. Okay, we're going to get into tomorrow and the day after, which is great because we're going to talk about 2 days of yantif in Chutz La'aretz, and then we're going to talk about 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, which is very relevant to what we're going into, and you'll understand what the sanctity of the 2 days is. It's a big debate. Is it one full long day or is it 2 separate days? And is it all just because we don't know what day it is? And therefore, right, so this is based on 2 sanctities, and we just don't know which day is which day is the holiday, which day isn't. So if the first case is, if you have a kilkala shel perot, a basket of fruits, and you forgot to do trumot u'maschot, you forgot to tithe the produce, what do? So you can stand up on each day. I put this in the chart also. On the first day, I specified a little more in the chart at the bottom of the first side of the page. You say, I'm taking this produce and separating it right now. If today is Yantif, then I'm basically not doing anything. I've just moved some fruits to the side. That has no meaning because I can't do it on Yantif. If today is not Yantif and tomorrow is Yantif, then I'm actually taking Trumot Maslo right now. Tomorrow, what do? You do the same thing. You take the same fruits and say, I'm designating these as my produce for Trumot Maslo, my tithes. You say, if today is Yantif, then I'm not doing anything. But what you did yesterday was obviously then yesterday wasn't Yantif, and it would be valid. And either way, you're covered. And if today isn't Yantif, then I'm doing it right now. And then what you did right now is effective because it's not Yantif. So you can do that. That's called matneh. You make a t'nai, a condition. You take the Trumot Masrot on condition, and you can eat it on the second day. Same with an egg that's laid. On the first day, you can eat it on the second day. Now, what does it sound like? B'sheni in, b'rishon lo. On the second day, yes, but not on the first day. Now comes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yochanan, and he says, I don't understand Rabbi Yehuda. If we view it as uchla de'ifrat, then we basically say that what's inside is just part of the whole. And you can basically, right, you should be allowed even on the first day. It's just being separated from something of inside it. It's not an example of amigo. I see your question. No, it's that this is basically the same idea. Okay, I'm not sure how Migo works here, how you would think, but in any case, right, Migo isn't, because we permitted something, we permit something else. That's different. But what we're saying here, it's also not Brera. Brera is we're going to retroactively designate that something was, where something in the beginning wasn't clear at all, and then we're going to do an action later. This is what we call a condition. We're going to say, if this, then that. If not, then, right, and then we're going to do it twice, and then we're going to be covered. Okay, so now what we have is, we have this comparison. We're saying, Beitzah shenolda, if Rabbi Yehuda says it's uchla de'ifrat, that basically the liquids that come out of the food is considered we're like removing it from inside and it's fine. It's not like something different. Then you should say the same thing with the egg, and an egg that's laid on the first day should be fine. So what does Rabbi Yochanan answer? Mashane Rabbi Yochanan mukhlefet hashita. He says it must be Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda switch. And really Rabbi Yehuda forbids mashkim shazavu, which is why he forbids the first one, which is why he forbids also the Beitzah shenolda on the first day. Everything's forbidden according to him, and that resolves it. The whole main point, again, why we brought this in the Gemara was to show that Rabbi Yochanan is comparing Beitzah shenolda and mashkim shazavu. That's clear. It's not clear Rabbi Yehuda is comparing them. It's clear that Rabbi Yochanan, by putting Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Yehuda and having to resolve it by saying it must be, we switched who says what, and it's wrong, the version that we have, was because he thinks they're both one and the same. And now, right, which is what the Gemara says now, because he throws both those sources up against each other and says they must be the same thing, it must be they all come from the same reason. Now, Ravina Amar, as I promised before, right now we're off on a tangent, and right now, because we were on our approach, which was we have 4 approaches to how to understand the Mishnah. We now want to say that Rabbi Yochanan agrees with approach number 4, that it's because of Mashkim Shazavu, right? After just to go through again, we brought so far, all we did in the Gemara, just in case you're not clear on some details, right? The structure is very clear. 4 answers how to explain the Mishnah, what the case is, and what the reason is why Beit Hillel forbids. Then we tried to say, why doesn't each one hold like the other? What's the weakness? Really, we're trying to say, what's the weakness in each approach? Then we brought Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yitzchak, which was the last answer that we brought, and we just proved that. Since we brought up this contradiction, where Rabbi Yochanan says, switch the opinions, we're going to now see 2 other resolutions where you don't actually have to switch the opinions, right? You're always better off if you can come up with a better reason as to not say, oh, it's just a mistake and we should switch the opinions. Who says what? So Ravina Amal, lo olam lo tepuch. No, don't switch who says what. I'll explain it to you. Rabbi Yehuda, when he was talking in this Mishnah, V'odamar Rabbi Yehuda, he was saying, L'divreihem de Rabbanan ka'amar. He was saying, according to the rabbis who were stricter about the mashkim shazavu, what he wanted to say is, when he talked about the egg, he said, L'didi, according to me, afilu b'rishonam misharya. I think it's all uchla de'ifrat. It was just inside and it just came out and it's totally fine. But lididchu, but according to you, who think that it's forbidden, do you think Beitzah shenolda is asur because you don't view it as uchla de'ifrat? But at least admit to me that you'll forbid it on the day it's laid. But if we're on the next day, if it was laid on Shabbat and it's Yantif now the next day, at least admit to me that B'Sheni Sharia, Dishtei Kedushodhen. Why? I'm sorry, it's not Shabbat Yantif, it's Yantif and Yantif. My mistake. 2 days of Yantif, at least agree with me that on the second day of Yantif, it should be permitted because it's all just Shtei Kedushodhen, right? They're two different sanctities. It's either one or the other. So I understand you think Beitzah Shenolda is forbidden on Yantif, but at least tell me on day number 2, it should be permitted because either way you look at it, either it was born yesterday, which was a regular day, or it was born today, which was a regular day. So either which way, it should be fine. Rabbanan don't agree with him about this. They say, lo, kedusha achati, we think that 2 days of Yantif is one whole day of sanctity. And this is something we're going to get into more in detail in tomorrow's daf, which is, right, or the Shtei Kedushot is there, we'll get to later on Sunday, we'll talk about Rosh Hashanah, okay? And is it viewed as 2 different sanctities? Is it viewed as one sanctity? How do we view it? Ravina, a third option to resolve this contradiction, Ravina read Rav Ulama, hacha b'tarnagolet ha'omedet legadel beitzim. What we're talking here is about a tarnagolet that was meant for laying, you bought it for laying eggs. Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei di'lei muktzah, right? It wasn't that we were planning to eat the tarnagolet and that's what we can have. And that whole interpretation, uchla de'ifrat, has to be according to it's a tarnagolet ha'omedet le'achila, because then it's not muktzah. And the food is not considered something new here. It's just part of, right, the egg. It's considered just part of what was inside the hen. But if it's trying to go there, that's why Rabbi Yehuda forbids the Beitzah Shenolda, because it was muktzah. Rabbi Yehuda, remember, he has the more broader definition of muktzah, which means he includes this in muktzah. And that's why he forbids it. And only on the second day he'll permit it because of, again, the miman afshach. Either which way you look at it, right? One day was sanctified, the other one wasn't. But on the first day, it'll definitely be forbidden because maybe that day it's Yantif, right? We don't have an option. Maybe it was born, right? That for sure it was born either yesterday, right? Either one day was a Yom Chol. No, you have a problem and it's muktzah. Okay, so that was 3 resolutions to that contradiction. But again, the whole reason we brought the contradiction was just to show that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Yitzchak. Now we're going to bring a contradiction, which is going to take us far into tomorrow's daf, which is that now let's talk about our 4 options. And I set this up earlier so you would have it in your head, which is the first option, Rav Nachman, is muktzah issue, nolad issue, which even though it's really not deoraita, although some people do say it's deoraita, but it's maybe close to deoraita. Maybe that's why they don't ask a question here in Rav Nachman. Okay, we're going to have a question that's basically going to derive from the ones that say Rabbanan, that it's only rabbinic, are going to have an issue. So Rav Nachman isn't mentioned in the sugya at all. Okay, we're going to see. They're going to say, Rabba, it's not a problem, but for Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Yosef, it's a problem because Rabba holds it's hachana, which comes from the Torah, and it's a Torah prohibition. Rav Nachman's not mentioned here. Some of them say, why is he not mentioned? Some people say because his opinion was rejected anyway, or maybe they view muktzah as either deoraita or at least close to it, even though we really say muktzah in general is only rabbinic, but maybe it's a very serious derabbanan. Okay. However, these gzerot, that it's just a gzera, shema, right? You might come to it. That's already derabbanan, and we're going to be much more lenient. In general, we have a principle. And it's safek deoraita. If you have a doubt about a Torah situation, l'chumra, you have to be stringent. Safek derabbanan. If you have a doubt about a rabbinic situation, l'kula, we're always lenient. So we're going to have an issue with those 2 approaches based on that theory. Meitive. So now we're going to read a Beitzah. אחד ביצה שנולדה בשבת, ואחד ביצה שנולדה ביום טוב, אין מטלטלין אותה, לא לחסות בה את הכלי, ולא לסמוך בה קרעי המיטה. If you have an egg that was laid on Yantif, you cannot carry it, it's muktzah. You can't carry it for what purposes? Not to cover the top of a jug, let's say, or not to lean a bed on it, right? This whole debate, what is this bed? How could you lean a bed on an egg? We've had this before. You can look it up, whether it's possible to do this or not. Some people say it's something much lighter. Not for us for today. Avam, kofeh aleha et hakli. What you can do is, bishvil shelo tishaber, you can put a bowl on top of it, let's say, so that it doesn't break, right? Imagine you have an egg on the floor, right? The egg was laid and now it's just sitting on the floor. Someone might step on it. Right? It happened to me yesterday. I took an egg out of the fridge and it just plopped on the floor and made a huge mess, right? You really don't want an egg mess in your house. So basically we're going to say, right, you can cover it. That we allow you to do, but otherwise it's basically muktzah. Okay, that's not really important for our purposes. But here comes the next one. Usfeka asura. If you're not sure, now what are you not sure about? What are we assuming? You're not sure. You weren't watching your hen all day long. You don't know when the egg was laid. Was it laid before Yantif or on Yantif? So if you have a doubt, what will we say? Well, safek d'oraita. If it's a d'oraita issue, we'll say l'chumra. It's forbidden. If it's d'rabbanan, we're going to say l'kula. It's permitted. So what does it say in this Beitzah? Usfeka asura. It's forbidden. Okay, that seems to indicate it's a Torah issue and not a rabbinic gzera, a rabbinic ordinance. Otherwise, we would say it's allowed because you're not sure, doubtful situation, l'kula. That's our main problem. But we're going to continue the Beitzah. Ve'im nitarva be'elef kulan asurot. If you had an egg that was born on Yantif and it gets mixed up with all sorts of other eggs that were laid yesterday, then what do we say? Oh, if it's mixed with 1,000, right? You would think it would be mixed up with all these classic laws of Tarov, cancel, right? Nullification. Batal barov, batal b'shishim, right? Either majority or 60 or, right? 60 wouldn't make sense here because 60 has to do with taste. We're not eating them, right? But I mean, you might eat them, but it's not like the taste got mixed up. That would be like milk and cholent. But anyway, here it says, if it gets mixed up in 1,000 different eggs, kulan asuro, they're all forbidden. In other words, laws of nullification do not apply. This is going to be very important for us for the continuation. So let's start. The first line we're bothered by is the sveka sura, as I mentioned before. So bishlama l'Rabba, as I mentioned here, they don't mention Rav Nachman. Bishlama l'Rabba, this makes sense according to Rabbah. Ta'amar mishum achana. Remember, he said it's hachana. Based on the man psukim, everything had to be prepared before Shabbat, likewise before Yom Tov. This egg was not prepared before Yom Tov. Therefore, it's forbidden. And it's forbidden on a doraita level, and any safek doraita, we're going to be stringent. But they said it's all a rabbinic ordinance. Anytime you have a doubt about a derabanan situation, we're lenient. So Amarle, or there's a different nusach a little bit, but let's not bother with it right now. Seifa atam safek treifa. The first answer, the second answer we're going to see tomorrow. The Gemara is actually going to say it is talking about a Beitzah shenolda, and they're going to explain. But the first answer is the safek mentioned here, even though our topic was Beitzah shenolda b'Yom Tov, the doubtful situation that we're referring to here is a different doubt about an egg. It's that you have an egg and you're not sure, was it laid from a hen that was a treifa. Treifa is a hen that is sick and not going to last, let's say 12 months. Again, we'll get to chulin, we'll see there's a few different definitions, but let's just say simply, okay, it was a sick bird, chicken. An egg that comes from a tarnagolet, a hen that's a treifa, is forbidden. So our case is, this was laid from a hen. Maybe we're not sure which hen, and we know that one of the hens was a treifa, and we don't know if this came from the hen that was a treifa or not. Or maybe we don't know if the hen is a treifa. There's a doubtful situation about this hen. That's the doubt. Then it becomes a deoraita issue because a treifa is forbidden by Torah law. So therefore, what we want to do is find a situation that it's a deoraita. So that sounds like a good solution. However, there's a big problem with the continuation, which is Ihachi ema seifa, and this is why I said we're going to deal a lot with this next line. Nitarva be'elef kulan asurot. But if it's a safek treifa, why should it never be nullified even in 1,000? Okay, we're going to learn a lot about laws of nullification now. So Iyamar bishlama safek Yom Tov safek chol. If it's Yom Tov, we don't know, was it born today? Was it born yesterday? Then it's very easy to explain why it's never batel. And this is because of an important principle in laws of nullification. Okay, basically, laws of nullification work by Torah law. Everything's batel berov. You can have it majority, right? You have 3 eggs and one is a problem. Okay, and it gets mixed up and we don't know which is which. You can permit them. That's laws of Torah, right? When it came to food, the rabbi said 1 in 60 because of taste. Less than 1 in 60, you don't really taste it. Then there's certain cases like truma where it's 1 in 100. We're going to see that tomorrow. There's certain cases where it's 1 in 200, and there's certain cases where it's never nullified at all. What would be a case where it won't be nullified? So one of them we're going to learn right now, and the next one we're going to learn in a few minutes, which is have davar sheyesh lo mitirin. B'chol davar sheyesh lo mitirin afilu be'elef lo batel. Remember we talked about chametz, how it's asur b'mashu, and the Mishnah didn't say anything about mashu. Why do we say asur b'mashu? It means if chametz is mixed in with your Pesach stuff, anything is a problem. Why? Because chametz is a davar sheyesh lo mitirin. It's forbidden now, but it will be permitted when Pesach is over. So it's not something, generally, laws of nullification work that we want to prevent you from a huge loss. So because we want to prevent you from a huge loss, what do we say? We're going to allow things to be nullified. However, if there's no loss, this egg was born today. Today it's forbidden. Tomorrow, it's no problem. So if it gets mixed up with 1,000 others, we're not going to say, oh, just ignore the fact that there's an egg in the middle mixed in that's a problem to eat today. Eat any one you want, because it's not really a loss. So you can't eat today, but you can eat them tomorrow. So because of that, okay, that's Rashi's logic on Davar Sheish L'Matirin. Tomorrow's sugya, because again, a little more in depth into Davar Sheish L'Matirin, I'm going to explain the Ran, and there's a bit of a problem with the Ran based on our Gemara. There's different explanations to why he thinks that, but in any case, let's stick with that for today. So called Davar Sheish L'Matirin, afilu be'elef lo batel, it's never nullified. So if that's the case, right, but Ella Iyamart Safek Treifa is a Davar She'ein Lo Matirin. A Treifa will never be permitted, and therefore Davar She'ein Lo Matirin v'tibatel beruba. It should be nullified with majority, meaning you have 3 eggs, and one is a Safek Treifa, one is a Treifa even, right? Even it doesn't even have to be Safek. It's a real Treifa. 2 other eggs that are not. We basically say laws of nullification, and it's nullified. So therefore, if you say the topic of that Beitzah is Safek Treifa, it doesn't make sense with the last line. So now let's come up with a different reason why a Safek Treifa egg would not be nullified. And this is because, like I said, there's other reasons. I'll give you a good example. Bugs. Why are people so crazy about bugs and cauliflower, broccoli, lettuce, things like that? Aren't bugs teeny, right? Usually it's kazayit. But what do we say? Right? Or you could say it's nullified and there's more than 60 against the teeny little ant that's going to crawl into your food. But what's the problem? It's a bria. It's a whole creature. That already has significance. So likewise here, we're going to say maybe the egg has significance. If something is significant, then it can't be nullified, right? Think about it. Nullification just means, right, your milk falls into your children. Okay, your milk is not important. You have a drop of milk that doesn't have any, it gets absorbed. You don't even see it anymore. But if something has significance, then it's going to be a problem. What could give something significance? So the answer they're going to give here is, well, now they're going to suggest and then reject it. If you're going to say, Beitzah chashuva v'lo batla, it's important. Now, why is it important? And because of that, it's not nullified. Well, it all depends on what you say about this machloket, about if you sell things. Okay, the idea here is there's going to be, I'll give you the background. If you sell things by number, okay, eggs are sold by the number nowadays. You buy a dozen, you buy 18, you buy 30, whatever it is, you buy it in a box that comes right in this, or they come in different sizes, right? Also abroad, I'm sure they come in different box sizes. You buy them by the number. You never buy eggs by, oh, I'll just take a batch of eggs and, it's about 12, so I'll pay you X for it. You don't do that. But in those days, they clearly bought, as clear from the sugya, some people bought eggs by number, by counting one, each egg costs X. And some people buy eggs by estimation. Here's a batch of eggs. Here's your price. Because of that, we're going to see not everyone agrees that gives it significance. There's a debate. Does it have to be exclusively sold by number, or potentially, could be sold by number and could be sold in some other way? So it depends how you hold on this debate. So Hani Chalaman Damar, this would work well if you say in the upcoming Mishnah that we're going to say, there's a debate about what the wording of the Mishnah is. If you say kol shadar kol imanot, which means anything that gets sold by number, which would include, even if it's not exclusively sold by number, shaninu, right, that we learn that way in the Mishnah, then it would make sense. But if you say it's only things that are exclusively sold by number, then eggs won't fall into that category and eggs will be nullified. Then we're back to square one. So now we need to get the background on this whole thing, which is Ditznan, says in the Mishnah. Now our topic is kilei kerem, which is if you plant grains or something in the ground next to a vine and they intertwine, right? They're too close to each other. That's called mixed breeds and it's forbidden and you have to burn it. So if you have tiltan, you had clover, batches of clover. There's a debate about what exactly is it. Spice, is it something else? What exactly is it really clover? Anyway, debate what exactly it is. But you had these bundles of things that grew in the ground, shel kilei kerem, that were grown near a vine. And what do we do with them? Yidalku. You have to burn them. If they that bundle fell into a batch, a pile, one from that pile fell into another pile, and we have no idea if it's the problematic one or not. Kulan yidalku divrei Rabbi Meir. He says everything has to be burned. It can be nullified in 1 in 200. I told you certain things are 1 in 200, like kilei kerem. It has regular laws of nullification for kilei kerem. Shaya Rabbi Meir Omer, et shedar kol imanot mikadesh, Okay, why is Rabbi Meir so strict and says it's never nullified and everything has to be burned? Because mikadesh. In other words, mikadesh means it has to be burned because of kalei karim. It's a word used from the pasuk there. Since it's something sold by number, these bundles of clover are sold. You buy 1 or 2 or 3. You pay by the number. Therefore, it's never nullified. Rabbi Akiva Omer Shiv'ah. The rabbis say there's only 6 things that have significance. It's not anything that's sold by number. They think it's only 6 items. Rabbi Akiva adds a 7th. These are them. Elohena Guzei Perech, a certain type of nuts. Kilchei Kruv, cabbage, the stem of the cabbage. I skipped. Rimone Baden, types of pomegranates. Chaviot Stumot, sealed barrels of wine. Chilfei Tradim, these are types of spinach. Kilche, or maybe beets. Kilche, because the Swiss chard is the beets, the roots that grow from them, which are like spinach. Kilche Kruv are the stalks of the cabbage. Udlat Yavanit, and this particular type, Greek gourds. The Rabbi Akiva Mosif Af Kikrot Shabal Habayit. The 7th one, the Rabbi Akiva adds are loaves of homeowners. You make your own loaf of bread. That has significance. So those are the only things that have significance. But we're really focusing on Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said, "Et shedar kol imano." Now there's a debate, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, how we understand Rabbi Meir. Is it okay? Before we continue, there's one more line at this Beitzah. When it comes to this list of 7 items. Some, or really 6, not Rabbi Yehuda, who's a loaf of bread, but 6 are of those items. Some are fruits of the tree, and their law relates to laws of Orla, which is if you have the first 3 years, it's forbidden, and also you'd have to burn it. And kilei kerem, if it was vegetables, things that grow in the ground, then it's kilei kerem. In other words, basically saying these laws are the same for both. It all just depends, is it a fruit? Are you talking about trees? And the issue of Orla, you're talking about things that grow on the ground, the issue of kilei kerem. The Itmaralan, it was said about this Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan Amar et shedar kol imanot shaninu, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar kol shedar kol imanot shaninu. So now we saw Rabbi Meir said et shedar kol imanot, but there's a debate about the wording in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan says it's only things that are et shedar kol imanot exclusively sold by number. Rish Lakish says, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says it's things that could be sold by number, kol shedar kol imanot, anything that potentially could be sold by number. So, therefore, let's go back to the beginning. Hani chala Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Our sugya makes perfect sense according, and that's our answer, that it was a Beitzah treifa, makes perfect sense according to Rish Lakish, since eggs are sometimes sold by number, therefore they have significance, and therefore they're never batal, and we're great. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, we can't possibly explain this, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no way to explain that Beitzah. If the Beitzah is talking about a safek treifa, then it should be nullified, regular laws of nullification, because we don't only sell eggs by number. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan ma'ika lameim. So the answer is, and say it's a simple answer, but you're going to have to wait till tomorrow to read all of this inside. I'm just going to end with the answer. Amar Papa, Hi Tana de litra diktziotu. Ta'amal kol davar shebeminyan afilu b'derabanan lo bata v'kol shekem b'deoraita. Forget about Rabbi Meir. We were trying to fit it in with Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to say there was some other Tana, which is a Tana that appears in the Mishnah in Trumot, and really it's based on this Tosefta on the Mishnah, okay? It's what we're going to read, this source that's coming up next that you'll see in tomorrow. We'll read it, we'll learn it tomorrow. We'll start with it tomorrow because it starts a whole long thing here. I don't want to end mid-sentence. So we're going to have a sugya about pressed figs, that they would press them into cakes. And you have a case where there's pressed figs that are truma. The thing you have to remember is the truma de oraita is only on daganti rosh and yitzhar, which is grains, grapes and olives. Anything else is only rabbinic. And here you have a suffix about a rabbinic case. You got, it was a tarovet, a mixture. And we're going to say, according to one of the opinions here, anything kol davar shebeminyan, anything that is potentially sold by number, because the figs also are not always sold by number. They're sold in different ways. These figs are not nullified according to the one opinion because they're part, right? Because they have importance. And therefore, we're going to say that Beitzah that said Sveko Asura, which we explained has to be talking about a treifa, because otherwise we wouldn't be strict. And yet it says it's never batel. It must be the author of that Mishnah, okay? Or that one opinion we're going to see in that Mishnah, really in the Tosefta, which says this is never nullified. And that's because it's sometimes sold by weight. And there it's rabbinic. For sure here, when it's Torah law, we're not going to allow it. So that's all to explain the first way of reading this Beitzah. And tomorrow you'll see there's a second way of reading the Beitzah, which is that it actually really is about a doubt about Safek Yom Tov. Was it born on Yom Tov or not? And then they're going to have to explain why was it never nullified? Why are we so strict about it? And for that, you'll have to wait till tomorrow. So have a Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and we will meet up again on Sunday. And tomorrow's Shiur will be up probably in the next hour. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.